My name is Carter Brooks, and at the moment I am calling myself an artist and philosopher of climate art.
My name is Colette Sartor, and I am a fiction writer.
My name is David Chen. I'm a reporter for the New York Times.
My name is Leslie Sydnor, and my creative job is I'm an architect.
My name is Erin Kelly, and I write stories about real-life princesses. Hi, I'm Gillian Horvath, and I work as a television writer.
My name is Ofer Levy. I'm a physician scientist who directs the Precision Vaccines Program at Boston Children's Hospital.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Leaf. I'm mostly known as a playwright.
I'm Nick Boulis. I'm a neurosurgeon at Emory.
I'm Erica Karakash. At Yale, I was Erica Penzer.
So here's a fun fact you may not know about me. I'm actually a singer.
My creative job is as a composer, lyricist.
I am a landscape architect.
I am a professional documentary filmmaker.
I'm an actor. I'm a theater director and teacher and arts producer.
I'm coming to you live from the Grand Salon at Yaddo, one of the fanciest motherfucking artist residencies you can get.
My creative passion is dancing.
I have just returned to pottery.
My creative outlet is my love of coffee.
I appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit about my passion for photography.
I'm a singer and a songwriter and a guitarist and bassist.
The creative path I have chosen is that of acting.
I am a writer-director.
I am a historic preservation consultant and an architectural historian.
I am a singer, actress, voiceover artist.
Hey everybody, I'm Mike. I'm a singer, songwriter, journalist, author, professor.
I'm Tony Dobranski. I write fantasy, science fiction, and speculative fiction.
My name is Torrance York, and my creative job is fine art photography.
My name is Ursula Burton, and I'm a filmmaker.
To be creative for me means to go into that quiet knowing place inside of you and that bubbly up kid creative place, see what starts coming out, and then apply a lot of discipline and work to that later to make it take on a form that will communicate and delight.
Creativity has always been a way of expression for me and a way of connection with other people too.
The scientific endeavor is one that involves creating something new, creating new knowledge. And to do that, you have to break prior paradigms.
Being creative is an invitation to share something and discover something.
Somebody said to me maybe 15 years ago, you know, you're an artist. And I never really thought of myself as an artist until that moment. The fact that you get up at 3:30 in the morning, day after day, to start writing, that's an indication maybe you're a writer. At some point, you have to accept that.
Creativity is part of at least my core value system, this desire to be able to see the impact of my labor in a way that will perpetuate itself.
Everyone has a little bit of creativity in them, I think. So I guess I can probably call myself, like 5% creative.
I actually have what I would call a semi-creative career. I mean, I am a writer and an editor, but I work at a nonprofit.
Coffee, I didn't really start drinking it until I was well into my 40s. And it's just become something that I discovered. It's like this little universe that there's so many details to. And I love just, everything about the experience. Part of the reason I think I'm so drawn to photography, which is incredibly versatile, is that my memory is not great. And so partly I record experiences as a way to remember them.
What I do the most of is research and document historic places. Often work to get them designated as a local landmark or listed on the National Register of Historic Places. And that requires making a case for the significance of a place. And that, I think, arguably could be considered creative because you've got a lot of facts, but you have to string them along in a way that creates a narrative that's compelling, that makes people care about it.
I think certain jobs lend themselves more naturally to creativity. Some demand creativity. But I think that you can find a way to be creative in just about everything you do.
Creativity for me is a way to survive because I've always been a creative person.
I've always had the desire to make things. Those inclinations have rarely, if ever, yielded like a living.
I can't really say that I'm a creative professional because I don't make my living off of being a climate artist yet. I've not figured that out.
For me, I think creativity has been something that's absolutely necessary, and it's definitely part of who I am, but I actually prefer that it's not my career.
I don't want any of this to move towards something that becomes professional or a job. Trying to somehow decide I'm going to make it a money-making proposition would, I think, drain a lot of the joy for me.
I dance anywhere from 3 to 4 hours a day just out of pure enjoyment. I'm not paid for it.
My day job is as a communications director, communications strategist for nonprofit organizations.
I'm self-employed, so I take almost any project depending on my cash flow situation at any given time.
I felt like I had to stay free as self-employed to kind of do this. Now I would look back and I would give myself some different advice that I could do a job and still you can bring your creativity to it.
I did a lot of freelance jobs. I remember my boyfriend's boss's son got married, and so I shot the wedding. That was so anxiety causing. But so I used to do, whatever I could do with photography. But then I got into teaching.
I wish I were that person who could write 8-10 hours a day and be so prolific. And financially, I couldn't afford to do that. I always had to have another job. So I teach.
I've both worked as a corporate writer and I've worked as a teacher.
I worked for many years as a paralegal. This experimental theater doesn't pay enormously well.
I work at Scholastic creating a science classroom magazine for kids, and I wake up early to do my own writing. And I'm working very hard to make my own writing feel like my main thing.
I started making money then as a voiceover artist, at which point my day job became less necessary and I was able to quit.
My entire life, adult life certainly, has been defined by the schism between paying gigs and non-paying gigs. The better the ratio is towards paying gigs, the more I feel like a professional.
Our family loved that we were creative, but didn't respect creativity. My mother and her younger sister were intensely creative, but they were also the crazy ones. It was just, conveyed to us that if we wanted to be respected, we had to be serious about something else.
My dad is a physics professor. My mom was into math. So they just didn't understand the idea of trying to do art for a living.
There have been family members and friends who were discouraging both about the idea of a creative career and also about the particular execution they were finding. And, sometimes that was because I was still learning and I wasn't that good. Sometimes it was because they weren't interested in what I was doing or getting what I was doing.
I had a mom who let me pursue absolutely anything and everything I was interested in, and actually threw some of her own interests in there as well. I love science. I'm the kid who I think I got a microscope at 8, but I got to high school, and started to explore art more. And architecture is a perfect blend of art and science. And then senior year, there was an architecture class, and I took that, and then, that was all she wrote.
My mother put me in ballet and tap classes when I was 5 years old.
I grew up with a father who would convert our upstairs bathroom, into a dark room twice a year. So I would hang out with him.
My parents were very active artists, and we were always surrounded by lots of artists in the house.
My family, I guess I'm happy to report, encouraged me to be like that, although they also did encourage me to have a fallback. I come from a crazy enough family that an English degree was considered a fallback.
My dad, when I said I was going to be an architect, I don't think they really knew what that was until they saw me actually making things.
At no point ever in my entire adult life has there ever been, any oh, you want to take a pottery class? No. You should take a pottery class.
There's absolutely no doubt in my case that I've felt 100% supported. It was my wife that bought me the ticket for a songwriting retreat. On my way home from that camp, I called her on the phone and I was blathering on about what an awesome experience it was. And she stopped me and said, just from the tone in your voice, I think you need to do this every year.
My wife, Sharon, is also a physician scientist, so it's really an honor to have a spouse who understands what it is I do and is so supportive of that.
When people come up to you after a couple of years and they're like, I so look forward to seeing the ice. Yeah, it makes me feel very supported.
The first concert that we did post-COVID, my father had passed away, and so my mom came with my sister-in-law, and, you know, that connection is just something that's so important to me that, you know, that my mom can still see me sing.
Yale wasn't really on my radar. I applied to engineering schools, actually.
I was raised in a very creative family, led by a father who thought women should be in science, not in the arts. So even though my sister and I sculpted and sang and wrote and did all these things, we went to Yale as chemical engineering majors.
My parents, I was very lucky. They paid for my college education. They said, as long as we're paying for this, you're not majoring in theater. I majored in psychology. I took a lot of English classes. And as I explained to people afterwards, psychology plus English kind of equals theater.
I ended up being American Studies literature major, and I'm a really slow reader, so that was kind of illogical. But I liked literature so much because I learned so much about myself. So the same thing happens with art.
I didn't really think of screenwriting as something that I could do. And I certainly didn't think of directing. Because, you know, especially for our generation, directors were mostly men. But going to Yale, I saw women doing everything.
I didn't have a lot of outlets for that, for acting, for theater growing up. And so when I got to college, that was, I just dove in. I had not a huge idea of how to do things. I just really knew that I wanted to do it.
Having 4 years at Yale where, you know, every residential college has a dramat meant that I could do 3 to 4 plays a semester. So I got in my 10,000 hours without even planning to.
I think even to this day, the reason that I feel like I can do something like kickstart a tarot card deck really comes from having been around a place where you can say, put on a show, and somebody else can say, yeah, let's put on a show.
I feel really lucky to have gone to Yale and met the number of people I've met that are still with me today and that I still want to collaborate with and want to do more with. I think if I hadn't gone to Yale, even though it was a very long path from Yale to me finding my creative outlet, I never would have found it.
A few years after college, an ex-girlfriend of mine died, which was a real shocker to my system. But it totally changed my perspective on life and what was important. So I was quickly no longer interested in being the same as anybody else. And that's when I came up with this, you know, artist of being. How I started with the ice. I went back to get a master's degree to study the science, but as a bit of a performer and storyteller, I always want to have props in my presentations. And I got this vision. I was like, I just need ice in the room.
I was about to go to law school because, you know, what do history majors do when you graduate from Yale, right? And of course, had a lot of parental pressure to go to law school, but I couldn't pull the trigger. So I, you know, made this arrangement or bargain with my parents to allow me to go to Taiwan for a year after we graduated. And I actually ended up landing a job at an English language publication. And I thought that the idea of just kind of learning about a new subject that I had zero expertise in, and then being able to interview different people involved in that was just so utterly fascinating, and I was just basically hooked.
So I have always been kind of a crafty person. I like fiber and I like needlework. I knit. During the pandemic, I actually learned to embroider. This is my embroidery gallery wall. And one of the most creatively rewarding things that I did during the pandemic was I took a short fiction workshop with Colette, our classmate.
I love my creative life. It is who I am. It is how I define myself. But it's been a difficult path. I didn't start doing anything creative till I was around 30. I slowly but surely started realizing this is making me a lot happier than arguing with other lawyers all the time. So I eventually quit law and I went to graduate school, got an MFA. I started writing and I started really realizing, I actually can do this.
I was interested in filmmaking in high school. So I go to Yale, which has no film program, because my parents were academics and they were very skeptical that I could ever make any kind of living in Hollywood. My friend Ofer Levy and I started a club, which we called Yale Student Film Productions. I remember running to class after a shoot or figuring out which classes I could skip so that we could shoot something. And, that was very instructive for my adult life, which has been very similar.
I remember sitting on the plane thinking, maybe I should go after this acting thing. And I figured either I would do it now, right after graduation, or I'd have to wait till my late 40s and when I'm in the middle of a midlife crisis.
I went to New York to work as an actor there, and then I just came out to LA and I worked at studios and learned a lot about producing. I have done just about every single job on a film set, which has really turned out to be really helpful because I know what people have to do and I know how hard it is and I know how long it takes. I wanted to have a little bit more control of what I put out into the world. And so I formed a production company with my 4 sisters, and I spent a lot of my time running 5 Sisters Productions. After college, I lived in Washington, D.C., and I worked at the National Museum of Women in the Arts, and I was working in education, and I realized that I didn't want to be working around the artists. I wanted to be the artist.
I went out to Los Angeles not long after we graduated, and I was visiting some relatives. One of them said, you have a very good memory. Why don't you go on a television game show? And I did, and I won some money, and I quit work for a while, and I read a bunch of books which I was supposed to read at Yale and did not read. And during that time, I also wrote a play, and I showed it to some friends, and they said, you seem to have real talent for writing characters and for creating suspense. Maybe you should think about this. But I didn't actually start doing it seriously for a number of years after that.
Over the years, I've been really lucky. I've made my living as a TV writer, starting out as an assistant and a researcher, and then moving up through the ranks, maybe more slowly than some of my colleagues, but little by little, making my way up the ladder to become a co-executive producer, what we call a number 2, and then a showrunner of a couple of shows of my own. Recently, I did a show for Peacock where I ran an animation show that's a pinnacle in a lot of ways. But interestingly, it's perceived around town that doing animation is a step down from doing hour-long. So at the same time as I was achieving some of my best work creatively, it isn't the best resume builder.
Over the years, I've done a lot of different things, writing and producing and singing and performing and acting. And, over COVID, I opened a coffee shop in the Catskills because I really didn't have anything else to do. All of these were creative pursuits, but I don't think I ever really had a plan. I'm just, I'm eager to try new things all the time. And the price I've paid is that I don't really have a career, like a linear career that a lot of other people, creative and otherwise, seem to have.
My life was not always going the way I wanted it to, or my job. I knew every Wednesday night I would go to rehearsal and see people that, grew to be close friends, and we would practice and make beautiful music together.
I was looking for something after work. I was drawn back to dancing. I started it about, 1997, and I haven't stopped since. I encountered some health challenges about 5 years ago related to back-to-back cancer diagnoses, breast cancer and multiple myeloma. I did a clinical trial. I'm in remission, so that's the good news. And so I've used this break as a chance to really go all in on my passion and spend a lot more time on my passion.
I'm at another transition. My daughter's grown and is about to move out, but I've been missing doing something creative. I've painted before and I've done things like that, but I realize that I'm very drawn to certain types of creative activities that are tactile, that aren't in my head.
I decided to become a director when I was in a writer's group that I am still in. We've been together over 20 years. And one of us was like, well, I want to direct this short. And we're like, oh, we could all do shorts. So I wrote one and I was like, oh, I could direct this. And I did it, and I have never in my life felt so at home doing anything as I did directing that first short.
How I got there is basically by following the thing that happened before it. That's basically all I do. That's my big philosophy.
As a piece of work swag, I had just gotten a traveling coffee mug, and our office had a cafe downstairs in our building, and that was a nice escape when I got itchy and needed to have an excuse to get out of the office for a little bit. From there, it just kind of took off.
I was a medical student at UMass in Worcester, and one day I went home for lunch, and then as I was driving back to the office, I saw smoke billowing on the skyline of Worcester, and I thought, I'm going to see where all the smoke is coming from. And it turned out the smoke was coming from my office, quite literally. I felt it was important to document it.
5 or 6 years ago, I was utterly burned out. I was working for a communications consulting firm. I loved the work, but I'd been doing it for 7 years at a very intense level. And I wasn't happy anymore. And I decided to downshift, and I took the job that I have now. It's not that it's not intense or important, but that job has given me back enough time that I can follow these two parallel careers. I have time to play at open mics and getting more and more gigs now where I'm up playing my own music, for people who aren't related to me, which to me is a success right there.
I had 18 years of legal contacts, litigator contacts. And I was able to parlay that then into moving over to the sales side. And that, rather than being a survival job, became a career. I realized that my identity had been languishing on the back burner. I decided that the way I needed to approach things was just create my own vehicle.
When I got out of college, there wasn't really a roadmap to being more of a genre writer. There was kind of the received, waspy, write for the New Yorker kind of thing. And that's what most master's programs were like at the time. And so with the recession of '89, I conceived of a grand plan eventually to go on my own. I was a ski bum. I lived in Lake Tahoe on my way there and back. I did a lot of visiting friends all over the country. That was one of the nice things about going to Yale, is that you had couches to crash on all over the United States. In the process of doing that, I think I meant for myself to become like the writer, the Kerouac-like writer, but instead I started doing more and more online in the days when it was a hobbyist preserve, and that wound up being my first real career. And it was an awesome one. I traveled internationally. I did really well financially, to the point that I can now do this creative work and not worry about it keeping a roof over my head.
Finding inspiration can come in different forms. Sometimes I am asked to do something by a writer or a producer who has a dream, a vision, and they want me to join forces with them. And other times I have my own pet projects that are gnawing at me until I write it. All the things I write are reflections of me. It's all I have to offer.
I haven't written anything that was terribly autobiographical, one, because I think my own life is really not that interesting. I think a good story involves, duels, love affairs, infidelity, murder. I don't see those things happening in my life with any great frequency.
My father, Benjamin, never graduated high school. He and my mother, Hannah, who is a musician, they moved from Israel to New York City, and they raised 4 kids in Manhattan, going to private school on only my father's art and my mother's music. And very inspiring to me.
As far as my inspiration, it's not from one specific place or specific sources. It's really from just taking everything in around me.
Travel is always great for inspiration for me. When I go see gardens in other parts of the world.
Anytime I go somewhere new, the first thing I do when I know I'm headed that way is to Google best coffee in and then the name of the city. And I find that's a great way to explore. I love, building some knowledge. So it's not just this tastes good, but to try to understand
why it tastes good. My inspiration comes from people who are doing, great things in their communities.
As an adult, I'm more inspired by other things that I see, like books or things out in the world, from theater, of which there's a lot in Chicago.
The other source of inspiration for me is my abiding interest in justice and equity and, making the world a better place. When I introduce myself at performances, I say I'm a songwriter and I make it my business to try and make the world a kinder and more connected place, one song at a time.
I like writing, although sometimes it's torturous to start. But I think I know somewhere deep inside that, I am a good writer and it's a gift and it's therefore something, that I like to share with others. And I think music has a similar kind of reward in that it allows me to do something that I enjoy so much, but also that it gives joy to others.
Creativity for me is really needs to be collaborative. There needs to be an element of it that is social and interactive for it to really work for me.
Often before I make something, I've been thinking about it for quite a while and trying to figure out the best way in to the thing I want to talk about.
My own process doesn't exist, is basically walk backwards and bump into things.
A lot of people ask songwriters whether they write the music first or the words first. And my answer to that is usually yes. I'll often have ideas on the guitar that I've been noodling around with that then come together with some lyrical idea and they influence each other.
Sometimes the themes aren't necessarily obvious to you when you're writing. So, for instance, I wrote this play. It's probably the best received of the plays I wrote. It is about a poet, Alexander Pushkin, the Russian romantic poet. It wasn't until we got into rehearsals that I realized what the play was really about. It was really about this guy's fight for his own personal freedom. And that wasn't obvious to me when I was working on the play. I think that writers can be remarkably oblivious to the real themes of their work.
I write about women who are kind of the mainstays of their families. They're the secret keepers. They're the peacemakers, and they're always living for other people before they live for themselves.
Many women rulers have grown up in families that didn't expect them to rule. How did they get a vision for themselves that was bigger than had been envisioned for them? And that fascinates me. That's been a theme in my own life.
I do feel that it is just intensely creative to try to come up with either a new approach to tell a story or to kind of find people who haven't really been approached before by the media.
I was writing not just because I didn't feel like I fit in, but because I knew other people didn't.
I don't give my main characters families they can depend on. They're either estranged from them or they're absented in some other past event.
I'm in this body, I'm in this place, and I want to keep staying grounded and centered. Interesting. Pottery, all about centering. Yoga, all about centering.
Yeah. Anything you see, something happened there before you got there, sometimes before the building built, and what are the different layers of history that can be in a single spot? And how can it be significant and important to different people for different reasons? But knowing that pretty much everywhere you go, something happened and someone was there.
The reason I photograph is to connect with either nature or other people. With a lot of my landscape work, I would title the work of the GPS coordinates where I was when I took it, in part also thinking about who else may have been there or will be there.
Everybody deserves a place to live. Everybody deserves some sort of shelter. Everybody deserves a good place to work.
I use a lot of the same plants because I know what they'll do and I know how they'll perform. And I always try to throw in something unusual, some little bit of whimsy.
I was very interested in using film in ways that were different. I was really interested in like outsiders, loners, lunatics, or people seen as lunatics, deviants, and outsider subcultures.
I'm always drawn to the underdogs, to the people who don't get as much representation, to the stories you don't hear as much.
I think I've been interested in how do people get to tell their stories? How do they get access to their stories?
who gets to tell their story?
When I look back at the movies I've made, they have to do with gender, women's stories, undertold stories.
Themes for the work that I've created so far, it's been about overcoming obstacles. In some cases, turning them into springboards.
As a climate artist, I'm more interested in keeping curiosity alive, learning how to be comfortable with uncertainty.
I've written heroes and villains, and they all have to resonate as real people, as three-dimensional people for me to be able to write songs for them.
In this recent project, Semaphore, the theme of the book is that I'm exploring the shift in my perspective after being diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. Through the anxiety of not knowing, what my future would look like, something as beautiful as a branch of cherry blossoms could end up looking like a neuron and its dendrites.
One of the most rewarding things for me actually now with social media is when I see clients' children posting pictures on Instagram and they're in my gardens. That gives me joy because I know that I've made an impact in a small way, perhaps.
When you have a room you've just got the room in the palm of your hand, there's just something juicy about people being focused and just like enraptured in attention.
I like to use humor to make people not feel so uncomfortable while sort of pushing them to think outside of their comfort zone.
What I want is for people to look at my work and think, oh, that's not okay to treat people differently. And if they're not thinking that, then they're thinking, oh, I can adjust how I look at the world and embrace all of these things that are different as normal and interesting and exciting.
Network science really requires thinking out of the box, having a very diverse team in every sense of the word, and giving oneself room to be creative, which some days works better than others.
If you're not touching something deep within you, then it's probably not going to be there in the work for others to see. I wanted to push the boundary of what's acceptable conversation and dialogue.
I try to write in the morning. I have a really difficult time imposing structure. I tend to default to anything else that has a deadline.
I do not love to get up early, but I get up and I grab my laptop and I just start writing.
I think the morning is the best time. I've heard of people who wrote in the evening. I have no idea how they do it. I'm tired at night and I have a hard time focusing, and I don't think I can be very productive at night.
Many times at work, I'd put in a good hour when I arrive there in the morning and then go for a coffee break and use the bathroom. So what I would do is we were up on the 5th floor, I would use the 1st floor bathroom. And as I came down to each platform on the stairwell, I might practice a dance routine on each platform.
The solutions lie in seeing the connection between A and Q, and understanding that it's not linear. And it always happens in the morning when I'm waking up. It has to do with this transition from sleep state to awake state that the ideas come.
I think the main thing that has helped me in sort of staying motivated with kind of a creative career is to mix it up, not to just do one thing over and over again.
I am the 243rd living Black woman American architect. And so it's something that you enter, with great determination. Architecture is a collaborative art. So I always have a team around. And so it's really easy to be motivated for whatever reason, either motivated to push your team to do more or just motivated because you're working with a great team.
One solution to the motivation is to remind yourself that you are doing it for you. You are doing it because this is an expression of yourself and something that you want to get done.
Sometimes I just have to say to myself, it doesn't matter if what you write is shit. Just sit down and write something. And write about characters you enjoy. And if I do that, I get that feeling going. And it's this feeling of a column of air that's going from the top of my head all the way down to my toes, and it's flowing. And if I write towards that, I will, even in my worst state, start again.
What drives me to do the princess stories is, well, it started with my daughter, Lydia, when she was a kid and fell in love with Cinderella. Cinderella just seeps in through the cracks. I thought, this is getting old. What if we could flip this a little? And I said, Lydia, let's look at Princess Cleopatra. I decided, let's start a Cleopatra club at her elementary school. Nobody's going to sign up because it's my weird geeky Yale thing. But I had waiting lists and I had moms like calling me, begging me to let their daughters in. And seeing what it did to these kids, seeing the dearth of material of that flavor, that drives me.
When I get into those dry spells, for me, getting my hands on the dirt, refamiliarizing myself with the environment, that helps me.
I thrive on deadlines. Of course, I will do all of it at the last minute while screaming.
Having a critique group, other people that you plan to meet to talk about your work is really helpful, because obviously if you're not prepared, you lose the opportunity to get their feedback.
The biggest challenge that I've seen is adapting. Technology has changed the performance world in a huge way.
My goal can't be to write the next great American novel, because if I set that as my goal, I will never write again. So my goal is always, I want to be a better writer today than I was yesterday.
One of the best things you can do, at least as a dancer, is just put on music you enjoy dancing to and freestyle and just see what comes out.
The other piece, and especially during the pandemic, was important for me, is to take a little time for yourself. And so for me, that was in the form of taking up yoga every morning.
There comes a point where you literally just have to stick something in the ground and say, I'm doing it now. I'm doing it in this place, in this way, for this amount of time. And it may not work. I think that we psych ourselves out a lot. Like, well, what if I get interrupted? What about this? Like, well, you deal with it.
You're looking for a story that's really interesting to you that you hope will be of interest to other people. And you should not get involved if it's not really of interest to you, because you're going to spend a lot of time on it.
I was talking to a friend of mine who's a poet, and she was asking me questions about music for a poem that she was working on. And I said, I'm just sorry I didn't bring my songwriting notebook with me. And she said, what do you mean your songwriting notebook? And I said, well, I have my work notebook and I have a songwriting notebook. And she said, oh, no. You have one life. You should have one notebook.
For all the things that I've done, I think I'm fundamentally very lazy and could probably get a lot more done if I use my time more wisely. My advice would be, don't do what I do.
I think that people should not think of creativity as something that involves the arts. Obviously there's enormous creativity in science, there's enormous creativity in business. And I think that people are wrong to think of the arts as the domain of creativity.
I think it requires a lot of creativity to, herd the cats and, try to balance many different people's or different stakeholders' needs. You got to be creative to solve big problems.
So there's an enormous amount of administrative and regulatory work that we do to get to our creative part. And it is a mental balancing act to keep that flame of creativity alive in the face of those administrative and bureaucratic headwinds.
In the television industry, if you're not moving up, you're moving out. I've reached a stage where I do consider the other possibilities that may be out there. What second careers may appeal as turnover in my original career may turn me over.
It hasn't always been easy. I have been very lucky. I was not one of those people who, started getting all this work when I was younger. I've been getting more work as I get older, and hopefully that will continue.
I pride myself on having been able to do things and still be able to pursue my dream, but in a way that I need to do, on my terms.
There was a time I was going to run for the Chicago City Council, but then I learned about how hard it was, and I said, fuck it, I'm going to go back and be a filmmaker. It's easier.
It's like Sisyphus, you just start pushing that rock up the hill again, and then it just falls on the other side. It seems like you should get to a point where it just gets easier. And it's funny that even though it's so hard, I still feel so driven to do it.
It still grounds me. I still want it. I still want to be a writer. And I think that is a good place to want to be.
When you go to a new place and you get a barista who's both knowledgeable and friendly, being able to strike up a conversation, that's That's where I've learned a lot, and it just makes it more enjoyable human interaction.
When we get together and you play the music and everybody just looks around like, hey, you want to dance? Want to dance? Nobody cares what anybody's political opinions are. Nobody cares about their cultural background. Nobody cares about the sexual preference. It's all about being in the present moment and sharing that with the person. And I often think if people just took dance classes and spent their time dancing instead of watching the news or reading political opinions, I think you'd have a much more tolerant and much more enjoyable society who got along better with each other and just enjoyed life a lot more. So please go take dance lessons.
When I look in the mirror, my value system, and I think this was part of what got bred into me at Yale, number one, if anybody's going to do this, it should be you. And therefore, you have a responsibility to try to change the paradigm.
There could be so much more that is so interesting and playful and fun and inspiring, and I'd like to put it out there.
I'm interested in exploring the key moments that might seem like moments where you haven't done anything, and how that can lift and help us connect.
Places are important, and you should think carefully about how you shape the landscape and what's kept, what's not kept, and why. And whose stories are told and whose are not and why, and to make sure that the whole community is represented, because it's extremely important.
I've always felt empowered by making something that I appreciated, something that I found valuable or, learned from or was curious to look at longer. But in this case, I really feel like it changed my life to make the work.
Yeah, I've written songs that have brought me to tears because it's revealed something to myself that I hadn't really seen in an honest light before. But I found that when I'm willing to do that, those are the songs that people come up to me after a show and say, I feel that way too. I mean, for an artist, what more can you ask than that?
To have this job and to be in this line of work, there are so many opportunities to kind of just listen and absorb and just kind of be fascinated by the people around you and be so awed by them. It's almost like an extension of all the sort of endless conversations that, I would have with friends and random people when we were at school.
I do think back on the time on campus and seeing the gardens around each of the colleges, the courtyards, and some of those were actually important and instrumental in the way I think about gardens today.
I'm so grateful for the opportunity to have studied at Yale and to make those friendships that are lasting a lifetime.
My Yale friends, to this very day, I consider my dearest friends and my most important circle of friends and supporters. And I just feel like, they're always going to be there for me, and that's a rare thing.
I'm mindful as I get older and we're all out in the world, that how rare it is that we have this group of people who we can have these kinds of conversations with. That's the greatest gift that I could ever have from you.
I've just once again been in awe of how incredibly thoughtful and honest members of our class are. I feel really privileged to be surrounded by such incredible people.
I would also like to say to all those boys who turned me down, thank you for teaching me how to handle rejection.
It's great talking to you. Have a good one, and happy reunion to everybody.